Hello, everyone. I will be waiting for a few more minutes to let more people join in. In the meantime, please feel free to explore the Teams platform. There is a Q&A box separately. There is a chat box separately. You can use both the features. They are available throughout this discussion. If you have any questions, you can start putting them in the question and answer section, and we will pick them up towards the end of the session to discuss it in more detail. And this webinar is being recorded and will be hosted later on social media platforms of Meridia and or GRS. I'll be waiting for a few more minutes and let everyone join in. Sharam, do you see my screen?
Yes.
And Jacob, are you able to listen and see the screens as well?
Yes, Jay. All well and
Okay.
good on my end.
All right, that's good. Thanks, Jacob. Thanks, Sharam. I'll be waiting for one more minute before we begin. Okay, all right. So let's begin. Hello and very warm welcome to everyone. My name is Jay, as you can see on the screen, and on behalf of Meridia and Global Regulatory Services, I would like to welcome you all to QSR to QMSR, the transitions that are going to apply in the USFDA, and where is ISO 13485 the ultimate champion after all of these things. So we'll be discussing a lot about the quality system regulation and the quality management system regulation. While many of the people whom I have interacted with have mentioned that it's just a difference of the alphabet M being added to the terminology, but I guess there is a lot more to be shared and a lot more to be discussed. So yes, officially welcome to the session. In this 1 hour, we will be enlightening you and all the other attendees on how the quality system regulation, that is QSR, is being changed and modified into quality management system regulation, QMSR. Just before we begin, I would like to give a big shout out and introduce you to Meridia and Global Regulatory Services, known as GRS. We are a regulatory and quality compliance consultancy. We support medtech, digital health, and diagnostic manufacturers in different types of regulatory compliance in the EU, in the UK, in the USA, and beyond. We act as the UK responsible person or as an EU authorized representative and can also take on representation role as an US agent. Apart from that, we help many of the young startups with their regulatory roadmap on deciding which market to enter first and what should be the optimum and the best strategy for them. Additionally, we look after quality compliance. This includes creating the entire quality management system, right from planning to implementation, and then also for the post-implementation phase. And apart from that, due to our unique size and structure, we are able to offer bespoke regulatory support. It depends on the company size that you have. So from startups, early spinouts to SMEs and multinational corporations, Meridia and GRS have been catering to all of them. You can reach out to us on our website, that is www.meddr.com. Alternatively, you can send us an email on mdd@mddltd.com. And that's quite a lot about us. Before we move on, I would like to introduce you to the speakers of the session. Along with me today, we have Dr. Sharam Ahmadi. Dr. Sharam Ahmadi is a seasoned regulatory affairs and quality assurance specialist, bringing 14 years of invaluable experience to our team. His expertise encompasses a wide spectrum of medical devices, including implants, personal protective equipment that is known as PPE, and dermatological products featuring medicinal components. Shahram's proficiency shines through his commitment in implementing ISO 13485 2016 compliant quality management system, developing standard operating procedures, and efficient audit management. Quite recently, Shahram has been a steadfast representative of Medidia. He has actively participated as a speaker and a delegate at various events throughout the European continent. And these events include NSL Days, Medical Technology Ireland, which happens in Galway, and the future of Swedish and Danish life science. And he continues to be a distinguished ambassador in the Nordic region. Along with Shahram, we have Jacob Skinner, who is joining us from Global Regulatory Services, our group's sister subsidiary company. Jacob has a 5-year background in the UK and European regulatory affairs. He specializes in delivering comprehensive regulatory support to medtech companies and medical device manufacturers. Jacob's expertise encompasses regulatory strategy and planning, ISO 13485-2016 quality management system integration, and medical device classification services. Jacob's commitment to regulatory excellence extends to his representation of GRS and Medidia at notable industry gatherings, including the MediLink Expo, the NHM Compliance Conference, the recently happened MedTech Innovation Expo in Birmingham, where he was a speaker, and he has recently published 2 white papers, one of which is featured in RAPS, and the other one will be out shortly. So we have a very strong representation of and a very strong background specialists who will be able to give you optimum and the best resource to navigate ISO 13485 or the QMSR regulations. So moving on, I would now like to invite Dr. Shahram to take on the stage and have an interaction with you all, where he will be starting to talk about what is QMSR. Just a little maintenance and time care housekeeping for the meeting. Please ensure that you use the question and answer feature and the chat box to drop your comments and questions. Towards the end of this session, we will be having ample of time to take on questions for different discussions. And apart from that, if any of the questions were not answered during the session, you have an opportunity to book a free 30-minute consultation, no obligation at all, consultation with either of our experts who will be able to discuss your product-specific requirements in much detail. Before any further ado, I would like to now pass it on to Shahram. Hello, Shahram. Please introduce yourself and start with your session. Thank you so much.
Hello, Jay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. As Jay said, I've been working in medical device field in different areas in medical device industry for 14 years, manufacturing, design, quality control, quality assurance, and regulatory in medical device industries. I work with different type of products like implantable medical devices, PPEs, and drug device products. So let's start my presentation by this question. What is quality management system regulation? Let's talk about what QMSR or quality management system regulation is all about. QMSR is set to replace the current quality system regulation, the old one QSR under 21 CFR 820. Essentially, it's set to replace the current QSR and change it to align this regulation with ISO 13485, the current version and the last version 2016. I mean, what does it mean? It shifts from the detailed prescription of the current QSR to more flexible and principle-based guidelines of ISO 13485. In simpler terms, QMSR is a major initiative by the FDA to bring the quality system regulations in line with international standards, especially medical ISO 13485. In fact, this harmonization effort is all about making it easier for medical device manufacturers in the US to comply with both regulatory ecosystem, I mean US and global quality management requirements. Ultimately, the goal of QMSR is to streamline the regulatory process to reduce the burdens and also make compliance effort less taxing for manufacturers, especially in the US, by aligning QSR with ISO 13485. Next slide, please, Jay. And the goals of QMSR. Let's dive into the goals of QMSR and understand what they aim to achieve. Firstly, harmonization. With QMSR, we're looking at aligning US regulations with global standards, especially ISO 13485. This alignment simplifies compliance and make it easier for manufacturers, the US manufacturer, to access international markets. Next, we have the risk-based approach in QMSR. In fact, quality management system regulation integrates the risk-based approach exactly like ISO 13485 throughout the entire quality management system in the organizations to ensure the potential risks are identified, managed, and if it's possible, mitigate effectively. Then there is the process orientation rule. QMS emphasizes the process-based approach, which means it focuses on ensuring effective interconnections all through and the detailed documentations within quality management system. Another key goal is regulatory efficiency. QMSR aims to streamline documentation process and reduce and to decrease the regulatory burdens for manufacturers in the US to make compliance less hefty for them. So to wrap up, QMSR is the FDA's effort to modernize and harmonize the quality management system regulations with international standards, as I mentioned many times, with ISO 13485. In fact, this initiative promotes the unified and efficient regulatory environment and ecosystem for medical device manufacturers in the US to facilitate for them a smoother operation and global market integration. Next slide, please, Jay. And the question is that what's changing in QMSR? Let's go over what's changing in QMSR. First up, integration of ISO 13485 version 2016. In fact, QMSR plans to incorporate ISO 13485 by reference. This means that unless specified otherwise, the ISO standard will directly apply to US regulatory requirements and ecosystem. The next one, we have the reduction in documentation and audit burden. The new system, I mean QMSR, aims to decrease the load on manufacturers in the US, especially those manufacturers operating globally, by aligning more closely with international standards. Then there are a key definition and requirements adjustment in QMSR. In fact, quality management system regulations redefine some key terms and regulatory requirements to ensure they are clear and concise with ISO 13485 standard, while it's still making sure everything complies with the overarching Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. Finally, it's important to note that the FDA will start enforcing QMSR requirements on February the 2nd, 2026. So I should mention that there is some time to get prepared and make sure everything is in place in order for the US manufacturers before change take place and to be enforced fully. Next slide, please. And now QSR to QMSR background, or it's better to say like QSR to QMSR timeline. Let's walk through the timeline for the transition from QSR to QMSR to understand the better history of this big change. The FDA journey toward QMSR began in February 2022 when they published the first draft. They published the proposal. Following this, there is a public comment period that ran May 2022. It means that during that period, stakeholders, economic operators, and all main actors in this field can share their feedback and thoughts on the proposed change. Then FDA has outlined a timeline where they aim to finalize the rule by the end of 2023. Once finalized, there will be a 2-year transitional period giving manufacturers in the US until February 2026 to fully align their system with the new QMSR regulation. In fact, this period is crucial for manufacturers to conduct the internal gap analysis, internal gap assessment, and make necessary adjustment at the comfortable pace. So we can have a quick summary of the key milestones. First, early 2022, the proposed rule for transitioning from QSR to QMSR is published. Then spring 2022, public comments period on the proposed QMSR rule. By the end of 2023, the FDA aims to finalize QMSR rule. In January 2024, an update from FDA confirming the replacement of QSR with QMSR, aligning with both GMP and ISO 13485. And we have the transitional period. This transitional period has been considered for 2 years from the finalization of the rule, giving time to the manufacturer from late 2023 to 2025 to comply with this new regulation. And in early 2026 is the deadline for medical device manufacturer to fully comply with this new rule and to, in fact, to be compliant their quality management system with QMSR that's harmonized with ISO 13.5. Over to you, Jay.
Thank you, Sharam. And now I would like to pass it on to Jacob, who will be talking about the impact of these changes. So over to you, Jacob.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Sharam, for that excellent analysis of the QMSR so far and what the timelines and key changes are. Thank you, Jay, for the introduction earlier on. For those of you that haven't met me or seen me present before, I'm Jacob. I'm one of the regulatory and quality consultants at Global Regulatory Services. My background is in medical device regulatory affairs, starting within the radiotherapy manufacturing environment, where I was involved in new product development, control of suppliers, and post-market activities during the manufacture of a Class 2B medical device for the European Union market. I have a career history working closely with a lot of startups and small to medium-sized enterprises, so I'm quite passionate about understanding their challenges when it comes to the resource availability and costs of bringing medical devices to market under the regulation. Also have a background in application of ISO 13485 2016 quality management systems, including audit, and an interest in aspects such as risk management and biological evaluation and IEC 62304 for software development. Okay, so let's look at the impact of the QMSR on medical device manufacturers and other stakeholders within the medical device industry and supply chain. Firstly, looking at the regulatory requirement as it stands, in 21 CFR 820.5, we have this overarching requirement that manufacturers placing finished medical devices on the US market or its territories must establish and maintain a quality management system which meets the requirements. And those requirements right now are set out in 21 CFR Part 820, and this is known as the Quality System Regulation. But as Shahram has explained, the Quality System Regulation is now changing to the QMSR, and this transition period is up until the 2nd of February 2026. So from this date, 21 CFR Part 820 will be amended and known henceforth as the QMSR. The only exception to this is that the changes do not impact the current good manufacturing practice requirements for combination products. So where do we stand today at the beginning or very early on in this transition period? For now, all manufacturers which place devices on the US market need to continue regardless to comply with the current quality system regulation. And importantly, the FDA is continuing to carry out inspections to the quality system regulation during this period. But what do manufacturers need to start thinking about, and what do we need to do? Well, firstly, let's consider that compliance with the QMSR requirements will be mandatory from the 2nd of February 2026. So ideally, we need to think about having a QMSR compliant quality management system in place prior to this deadline. But of course, that creates some issues because we also need to comply with the QSR as well during that period. So there's a dual compliance issue at play there. And you'll notice at the bottom here, I've said, is there a burden of compliance with both the quality system regulation and quality management system regulation for now? And I think, yes, there is, most definitely, because you've almost got to think about two documentation requirements while you're running your quality management system. And also that's amplified again if you are currently ISO 13485-2016 accredited, because we don't have this one-to-one alignment between ISO 13485 and the new QMSR. So there's always going to be specific FDA regulatory requirements which need to be considered. Now, what about FDA inspections going forward? There's been a good question that I've seen asked, which is, as we approach the deadline, will FDA quality management system inspections consider a manufacturer's progress towards meeting the QMSR compliance requirements? And at the moment, unfortunately, we have no clarity on that. However, the FDA rely on something called the quality system inspection technique for their inspection processes on manufacturers. And I would expect that this will be updated during the transition period to define how the FDA will look at inspecting quality management systems going forward. Jay, you can move on to the next slide. So let's then think about what the impact will be on manufacturers after this deadline on the 2nd of February 2026. From this point, it will be mandatory for all manufacturers placing finished medical devices on the US market or its territories to be in compliance with the Quality Management System Regulation, QMSR. So the first question to ask is, if we're a manufacturer who's already certified to ISO 13485-2016, we've gone out, we've been audited by an EU notified body, for example, and we've got a certificate, is that a presumption of conformity for the QMSR? And the answer is no. Because, as previously mentioned by Shahram and myself, the requirements are not one-to-one aligned. Also, another question that's commonly asked is, will the FDA continue to inspect manufacturers who are ISO 13485 compliant? And again, the answer is yes, there will still be mandatory FDA inspections to the QMSR requirements. So if you are putting in place an ISO 13485 2016 QMS and complying to QMSR, you need to consider that there'll be an audit cycle and certification, surveillance, recertification audits for your ISO 13485 accreditation, but you'll also have the potential for FDA inspections on top of that. And finally, a positive FDA inspection against the QMSR will not provide you with an ISO 13485 2016 certificate. So why is this? Well, there's some key differences. The ISO 13485 2016 standard and the QMSR are not in one-to-one alignment. As mentioned by Shahram, the QMSR adopts ISO 13485 by reference, but there are some clarifications and modifications to requirements which have been made by the FDA. And there is also augmentation of some of the clauses of ISO 13485 which supersede the corresponding requirements within ISO 13485. So firstly, we've got a slight difference in scope. ISO 13485-2016 is generally applicable to all of the interested parties within medical device design, development, subcontractors, suppliers, for example, may apply ISO 13485. The QMSR is only specifically applicable to manufacturers of finished medical devices. And therefore, components and subassembly manufacturers are out of scope. However, the FDA has been encouraging voluntary compliance to improve the quality of medical device supply chains across the board. Secondly, we have some key differences in the definitions between ISO 13485 and the QMSR. So mostly, the definitions now will be incorporated by reference, either from ISO 13485 directly or from ISO 9000 Clause 3. However, some terms from the quality system regulation, the existing FDA regulation, will be retained without modification, including, for example, the definition of rework, process validation, components, finished devices, and more. Others will supersede an ISO 13485-2016 term, and there'll be some withdrawal and replacement of quality system regulation terms with the definitions that are currently used in ISO 13485. For example, this is particularly relevant to management with executive responsibility, which is currently a term used in the QSR, and this will be replaced by the ISO term top management. Finally, we have to consider a difference in requirements. So anyone that is working with an ISO 13485-2016 quality management system currently will understand that ISO 13485 already requires us to consider the applicable regulatory requirements in our target market. However, so we will need to consider the additional requirements added by the FDA under the QMSR. And some of these which are particularly important are, firstly, there's an additional requirement for devices that support or sustain life. The FDA states that these must comply with the traceability requirements for implantable medical devices within ISO 13485, but that is not currently mandatory under ISO 13485. There's also a big change with the removal of specific quality system requirements for quality system record, DMR, DHF, and DHR, and these are all being considered to be covered by ISO 13485 Clause 4.2 on documentation requirements. The FDA is adding additional control requirements for records in that they are specifically stating that records must be signed and dated, and this is not set out in ISO 13485. And there's additional regulatory reporting requirements under the FDA's medical device reporting system defined in 21 CFR Part 803. And this particularly relates to complaint and service records and defines that certain elements of medical device reporting need to be captured and recorded within those records. Again, this is in addition to complaint records as set out in ISO 13485. And then because the FDA have adopted unique device identification, UDI, there's a requirement to use the basic UDI of products throughout your records to make sure that these are traceable back to the device. And there is an additional requirement for manufacturers to inspect labeling on products. And this is because the FDA have come to the realization that most of the adverse events and most of the recalls on the market relate to ineffective checks on labeling and to devices being labeled incorrectly. KJ, you can move on to the next slide. So what are the key points when we think about the impact that the quality management system regulation will have? I think, first of all, we can think sort of on winners and losers here. The biggest benefit is going to be seen by companies who are already ISO 13485 2016 accredited. And these are probably either US-based manufacturers selling into the rest of the world or EU, rest of world-based manufacturers who are also selling their products into the US. And that's because the harmonization between the two will reduce the kind of overall regulatory burden of complying both to the QSR and to ISO 13485, because the difference in requirements will be smaller than it is as it stands today. And for those manufacturers who are accredited, there's likely to only require minimal changes to their procedures and internal documentation to incorporate these additional FDA requirements. They'll need to do some staff training against new requirements, but it's probably going to be quite limited in scope. And also, considering the regulatory requirements of the local market, like the US, is nothing new to manufacturers that work within ISO 13485, because we've always had the requirement to consider the regulatory requirements in our target markets anyway. I think losers is perhaps a harsh term to use, but it doesn't benefit manufacturers who only sell into the US domestic market without an international presence quite as well. And I think that's because these manufacturers may not already be complying to ISO 13485 because they will be focused on the QSR. And therefore, it's going to be a significant change for them. And they're going to have the largest short-term regulatory burden of moving to be in compliance. And that's because they're going to have to learn and read and understand the ISO 13485 requirements. They're going to have to really revise and adopt new procedures and processes to comply with 13485. And I think another area is risk management. Shahram mentioned earlier on that what the QMSR really does is incorporate risk management throughout the whole of the product realization and production process, and really states that records of risk management activities need to be maintained. And interestingly, the QMSR doesn't incorporate ISO 14971 2019, which is the risk management standard for regulatory for medical devices. But it does acknowledge this standard, and it does utilize some of the definitions from this standard as well. So it's likely that the application of 14971 2019 will help provide a framework for meeting quality management system requirements under the QMSR. And again, that may be a standard that US domestic manufacturers are not so familiar with in their day-to-day processes. So I guess to summarize there, it's likely to require significant training of staff plus revision of procedures. But I think overall, and this has been picked up by Shahram earlier in the conversation, and also it's been clearly stated by the FDA and their reasons for moving forward with the QMSR, more harmonization and alignment in the long term will lead to much more streamlined business practices and procedures, reduced training requirements for staff by having to understand a standard and a regulation that are less divergent than they are today, and reduced record keeping requirements because there'll be less additional records required to meet the requirements of the US market. So overall, I think there's a reduction in overall total regulatory burden, which can only be a good thing for manufacturers at the moment who are struggling financially or with staff resource to complete regulatory documentation and submissions. Okay, and Jay, I will pass back over to you.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Now, moving on to the next part of this presentation is identifying a roadmap for transitioning to the new QMSR requirements that are going to come in play from 2nd February 2026. And I would like to bring back Shahram, who will be able to discuss more in detail about the roadmap and where to begin the transition journey. So over to you, Shahram.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you, Jacob, for valuable content. Now, I want to discuss about the roadmap for transitioning to the new QMSR. Here, let's discuss the roadmap for the transitioning from the old QSR to the new QMSR. Firstly, we have the FDA rationale for alignment. In fact, the FDA decided to align QSR with ISO 13485 to reduce the compliance burden for global manufacturers, especially who deal with two parallel and similar quality management system at the same time. I mean, quality management system aligned with the QSR and ISO 13485 at the same time. In fact, these alignments, QMSR, aims to simplify regulations and minimize redundancy for those type of manufacturers, and QMSR significantly reduce the audit burdens. Next, let's look at the implication of alignment. By fully incorporating ISO 13485 version 2016 into FDA regulatory frameworks, manufacturers will need to comply with ISO 13485 clauses. I want to emphasize, to comply with ISO 13485 clauses, all clauses, along with the few specific additional requirements of US. Moving on, we have the risk-based approach and also process-based approach. First, risk-based approach. With the alignment, there is a shift toward a more explicit risk-based approach and process-based approach within the quality management system. What does it mean? It means evaluating the effectiveness of each quality management system, procedure, and process. It's crucial, and also understanding how these type of process interconnect with each other. Another crucial aspect is training and adaptation for FDA inspectors and industry specialists. This is a very interesting area because both FDA inspectors and industry professionals will undergo significant training and adapt to the new requirements, I mean QMSR. In fact, it means understanding the new rule and preparing for assisting training FDA staff and also industry specialists. I want to add that, however, it's worth noting that industry professionals often have more practical experience rather than FDA nowadays. FDA staff with ISO standards toward the implementation of ISO standard and the quality management system based on ISO 13485 in their organization. We also need to, in the next part, we also need to anticipate the future revisions. What does it mean? In fact, the FDA has committed to stay involved in revision of ISO 13485 like any other ISO standards. It means that QMSR evolves as the standard 13485 evolves. In fact, manufacturer needs to stay vigilant and be prepared to implement the necessary changes as the new revision of ISO 13485 coming to force in future, that now we have the last version in 2016. And they should adapt into, it should adapt the new version of ISO, should adapt to QMSR. And lastly, there is community engagement and support. What does it mean? Manufacturers are encouraged to participate in discussions, training sessions, webinars, seminars, and all relevant events and other collaborative platforms to better understand and navigate the change smoothly. In fact, leveraging community knowledge and shared experience will be crucial for medical device manufacturer to have a smooth transition from the old QSR to the new QMSR regulator. And next one, Jay. Okay, over to you, Jacob. It's the first case study.
Okay, thank you, Shahram. And yes, I wanted to take the time to look at a case study based on the transition process that Shahram has just been discussing. Let's look at the potential situation which is facing an EU-based manufacturer of Class 3 non-implantable medical devices who sells their device on the US market as well. So currently, this hypothetical situation as it stands today, they are certified to ISO 13485-2016 for the design, manufacture, distribution, service of medical devices. They are compliant with the EU Medical Device Regulations, Article 10.9, which sets out the quality management systems on the European market, requirements on the European market. And they are also compliant with the current FDA quality system regulation and making their devices available on the US market. So, what does the transition look like? The change is from the QSR to the QMSR. The implementation of their quality management system according to ISO 13485-2016 does not necessarily need to change, and they need to continue to maintain that throughout the transition process. The transition will require revising their procedures and processes to align them with the QMSR and not the quality system regulation. And as they are ISO 13485-2016 compliant already, many of the requirements of the quality management system regulation will already be met. So what's the first step they should take? They should determine applicable regulation requirements. I see that one of you has just commented that there is a small typo on this slide, so I just want to rectify that. Here, of course, the reference for the EU MDR is 2017-745 and not 845. So what's the first step that manufacturers should take? First of all, they need to determine the requirements, and this involves really understanding ISO 13485-2016 and the quality management system regulation requirements, really doing a deep dive into those as a quality team within your organization. Secondly, we want to perform a gap analysis activity to evaluate our current process against the quality management system regulation requirements. And this is really looking at the current implementation of ISO 13485-2016 against the quality management system regulation. And that will identify where the gaps are. And once we know the gaps, we can start to plan to take action to close these and bring ourselves into compliance. So I'd be looking to develop a staged implementation plan at this point, which needs to consider the resources of the company and the timelines, particularly in terms of staff availability, in terms of finances, if there's any need for external consultancy involved. Many companies may want to take this opportunity as well to move across from a paper-based or almost legacy-based quality management system to an electronic QMS or electronic document control. So there may be budgets that need to be considered there for purchasing of software as well. And then, of course, verification and validation of that software. Once we've got this plan in place, we should be looking to revise procedures and process in line with the new requirements to close those gaps. But importantly, during the transition period, we need to maintain QSR compliance for now. So when you're adapting these procedures and processes, just be careful when you're changing definitions or amending requirements that you are still going to meet the quality system regulation. You can then begin to draft your new procedures, your revised procedures, consider what the effective date for those procedures will be, and ensure that your staff are appropriately trained. This may be able to be handled through internal training or through additional professional training. And again, you need to determine the training requirements for each member of staff, depending on how involved they are in the implementation process and in the ongoing maintenance and use of the QMS going forward. Ultimately, your quality management system needs to be aligned with the QMSR by the 2nd of February 2026 at the latest if you're selling devices on to the US market. Jay, please move to the next slide. So just following on, how do we ensure that we achieve compliance to the QMSR? First step, as stated, highlight and understand the differences. Where does your current ISO 13485-2016 QMS meet the requirements, and what additional requirements are there, particularly focused on the difference in definitions, new additional FDA requirements for traceability, FDA requirements for medical device reporting and vigilance. There's some additional requirements as well under the QMSR regarding to the management of recalls and field actions to adapt devices that are already out on the market. Additional labeling checks and packaging checks to be put in place by the manufacturer, which go over and above the current ISO 13485 requirements. The use of UDI throughout your documentation relating to each device, and ensuring good documentation practice procedures are updated to require signature and dates on records, if not always the case, although that's usually considered best practice anyway, in all honesty. The second step, establish this dual compliance approach, this strategy, develop your timelines, define your resources, document this strategy too, because that's important, and revise it as needed. Prepare beyond February the 2nd, 2026 for the possibility of FDA inspection. You may want to look at conducting internal audits or being audited by an external party to check your compliance and to address so that you can address any identified gaps before the FDA come along and inspect you. And of course, as part of all this, monitor for those changes as well. The final rule is fairly new, although it has been being developed for a long time. Additional guidance is still likely, and particularly this sits around the QSIT, the Quality System Inspection Technique of the FDA, which will be updated at some point before the QMSR comes into force. So again, as this guidance and documentation is released, update your strategy, consider its impact on your timelines and costs of compliance. And I'll pass back over to you, Jay.
Thank you, Jacob, for sharing this case study. And in similar lines, I think there is one more case study which will give a different perspective to this entire discussion of how to manage the QSR to QMSR transition appropriately. And Sharam, would you like to discuss this case with our audience today?
Okay, yes, thank you, Jacob. And hopefully I have a class 2 medical device instead of class 3, more easier one. Okay, I want to divide my advice in two different sorts. First, as a package of general advice for the manufacturer, and another package as a practical step, more specialist advice. First of all, general advice. This is in this case study, there is a medical device manufacturer, class 2 medical device located in the US. That it should start the process for complying with QMSR. The first thing is understanding FDA's rationale for alignment. First, it's very important to grasp the FDA rationale for aligning with ISO 13485. The goal in this initiative is to reduce the compliance burdens and streamline regulations for manufacturer, the manufacturers dealing with the US and international standards. The second one is the implication of alignment. The company, the US company, needs to comply with the ISO 13485 all clauses, plus a few additional requirements for the US market. And also adapting a risk-based and process-based approach. It's crucial to shift the focus toward the risk-based and process-based approach. In fact, the company should evaluate the effectiveness of each quality management system process and understand how these processes interconnect with each other. This means prioritizing the risk management across all aspects of the operations, not only the product manufacturing and product development. Training and adaptation for FDA inspectors and industry is crucial. This means that both the company team and FDA inspectors will need to be trained and to adopt the new QMSR rule. And the next one is anticipating the future revisions. As I mentioned before, it's recommended to stay informed about the potential revisions to ISO 13485. We know that the FDA will continue to be involved in these updates. So for the company, it's important to prepare for implement changes, considering the possible change in the revision of ISO 13485 to the new version and adapt with the QMSR. And the last one is engaging with community. We discussed before this. It's crucial for the company to engage with the industry communities. In fact, participating in discussions, training sessions, and other collaborative platform. This means that sharing knowledge and experience with other players in this field will help the company to navigate the transitional period more smoothly. Next slide, please, Jay. Thank you. And now we have a sort of practical step to begin the transition. First of all, it's good to have the gap analysis. Let's start by assessing the current quality management system against the 13485 requirements. Please develop an implementation plan. It means that to create a detailed implementation plan is important for the company. Please outline the necessary steps to align with the QMS, with the new regulation. These plans should include timelines and responsibilities for each of the player in this initiative. And training for the staff. Please invest in a comprehensive training program for the team, the company, and make sure that all staff are familiar with ISO 13485 and specific extra FDA requirements. And the revised documentation and process. Please update the existing documentation and quality management system process to reflect the new requirements. We can discuss a lot about the sort of the new documentation process and method in a QMSR, but I believe that we don't have enough time. But I want to just mention that some terminology and some sort of documentation in the old QSR has been faced a vast amount of change in the new regulation. And now we have the technical file preparation solely according to ISO 13485, clause 4.2. And the last one is engage with the stakeholders. Please communicate with the suppliers, customers, and other stakeholders about the changes. And finally, and maybe the most important one, is to, based on the available resource, please prioritize the action to ensure the smooth and compliant transition. Over to Jay. And
Thank you so. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharam. Thank you, Jacob, for giving this entire detailed overview on what needs to be done and how to do. And I guess this case study might be a little bit useful, as some of our attendees would be able to relate these cases with their current situations. As we come towards the end of this time slot and also the end of this presentation, I would now like to invite anyone who would like to ask any questions, and we can go for a question and answer round. And I will stop sharing my screen so that it becomes more of a collaborative Q&A session. I will see if there are any questions posted during the meeting. There are not many questions. I'm assuming that the industry is quite aware and quite prepared with how these changes can be done. But of course, definitely. So since we have plenty of time and questions can pop in at any moment, I like to ask Jacob if you could give us any 3 key takeaways that we can utilize in order to summarize this entire discussion. What would be the 3 key takeaways or the 3 main points that people should focus on?
I think if I had to give 3 quick points, then I would say understand the difference between ISO 13485 and the QMSR, perform a gap analysis, and create a robust plan for implementation. I think in general, just to answer the whole question of this event today, QSR to QMSR is ISO 13485, the ultimate champion. I think We can answer that as a no here, because the FDA's change amends 21 Part CFR by incorporating 21 CFR Part 820, by incorporating by reference ISO 13485. However, as we've learned, compliance to the standard is not enough. There's still a number of FDA-specific regulatory requirements which remain, and these need to be integrated with ISO 13485 to achieve full compliance. So I think in the short term, there's an increased cost and increased burden on manufacturers for retraining, for revising procedures. But long term, we've got more harmonization, long term reduction in overall regulatory burden, and potentially savings.
Okay, thank you so much, Jacob. And on the social media platforms from Meridia, we have been sharing an image asking the medical device manufacturers if the medtech industry was a kingdom, would people crown ISO 13485 as one of the kings? But apparently, from this comment, it looks like it is yet to be there. It is not the king, it could be the king's advisor, but definitely not becoming one of the kings. So that's interesting. I have some questions related to the presentation. Yes, definitely after this presentation ends, you will receive an recorded version of the presentation. Apart from that, the recording will also be held on YouTube platform. So I will email you out the link. And with regards to the presentation, yes, I will be emailing all of those materials out so that you can spark a conversation within your teams, use it for future reference. And definitely, if there is any question that or any requirement that you require, you can drop us an email and we will be happy to assist you with our different services that Meridia and GRS offer. I don't see any more comments or questions coming in. So just before we wrap up, Sharam, would you like to give any last tip of advice that people should keep in mind when they are trying to navigate the QMSR transition?
Yes, thank you, Jay and Jacob. I want to bear in mind that please do care about the MDSAP. As Jacob mentioned, to be part of the QMSR is not a part of safe site for medical device manufacturer to be exempt from FDA inspection. But the only potential exemption from FDA inspection would be part of MDSAP plan and program. And another thing is that about the documentation that I mentioned, it's voluntary for a medical device manufacturer to keep the old DHF, DHR, and also DMR dossiers. But we need to consider that all of these type of documentations now are gone, and now we need to prepare the new technical files exactly and solely based on clause 4.2 of ISO 13485. And the last one is to be complete with the QMSR, not only the type of in fact compliance with the new rule, but it should be considered as the type of financial benefits for SMEs and the small companies that I can recommend to the audience that refer to the content of the QMSR to know how much money saving and financial benefits it's faced for regarding the compliance with QMSR for the small companies. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Sharam. Thank you so much, Jacob, and everyone who are tuned in to listen to this session. Once again, I would like to repeat that this session has been recorded. You will receive the link of the session shortly, and we will be happy to share our PowerPoint presentations with you so that you can spark a conversation within your teams. Again, please feel free to reach out to us via our website, www.meridia.com, and we will be happy to offer you a free 30-minute consultation so that you can discuss this in more detail and more specific to your situation and your devices. And we would be happy to hear more feedback on this. You could also share this information about how you like the webinar on social media platforms. And that's all for today. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you once again, Jacob, Sharam, the teams at Meridia and GRS for collaborating, and everyone who attended this session live and who are also viewing this recorded version later on YouTube and different platforms. Thank you once again. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.